Good evening. Sometimes, in order to go forward, we have to take a backward step. When we are more solidly placed on that step below where we were, then we can go forward again. This happens, as tonight, when the questions are of a nature that take us back from where we were, from where we are, to a step back into the realm of the letter of truth and explanation, but only for the purpose of becoming more solidly established on that level, and then being able to proceed with greater confidence and assurance to the higher one. Now, this will come up in your experience throughout your entire metaphysical career, throughout your entire spiritual career. You will go forward and then find that you're at a place of uncertainty, and you will have to backtrack a bit and then start up again. In the same way, when you are actually healing, you will approach a level of consciousness in which you will find it unnecessary to use the letter of truth at all, to where you can sit down very quickly, find the center of your being, wait there patiently. It may be 1 minute or it may be an hour, until that feeling of release comes, that feeling that God is on the scene. And that constitutes your treatment or healing work. And then you'll find a day when this won't do. You can't find that center. You can't stay at that high level of consciousness, and you'll start back down with the letter of truth again. You'll start out with the word God. God, the consciousness of individual man, the I of individual man, God which constitutes individual being, having only the qualities and the quantities of God, so forth and so on. And then you'll come down to that part where you'll realize that this that is appearing as sin, disease, death, lack, limitation is but the activity of the second chapter of Genesis, the mind of man, which conceives these pictures of error, and this is the arm of flesh or nothingness. And then through that practice of the letter of truth, you'll again find yourself up on the mountaintop where you can sit, be still, and wait. And then the still small voice will thunder along and bring release. Now, we have something of that tonight. We have been up to the mountaintop. And we got onto cloud 9 somehow or other. And tonight we're going back to 4 or 5. Only that we may have a firmer footing and go up again. And we'll start with this question. Please define soul. You cannot define soul because soul is God. Therefore, it is an impossibility. Nobody has ever been able to define God. Nobody knows what God is. Nobody ever has known. God can never be known. Only God can be experienced, but God cannot be known. Lao Tzu, 500 B.C., said that if you could name it, it isn't that. Every mystic has said it is an impossibility to know God. Maimonides, the Hebrew mystic of the 11th century, said this: if you say that God is good, or that God is love, or that God is all power, or that God is grace, or that God is infinite, you are saying no more than if you say God is. There it is. To try to say that God is good is to try to define God, and at the same time is to set up the belief that perhaps something else isn't good, which couldn't be true if God is infinite. Now, who can embrace infinity in their mind? Who can begin to visualize what infinity is? Nobody. It's outside the realm of our ability to comprehend infinity or eternality or immortality. Therefore, it is outside the realm of possibility to define God. There is only one certain thing that we know beyond all question of doubt. God is. That is self-evident. We wouldn't be if there wasn't a God. The sun, the moon, and the stars wouldn't be going around in their courses if there weren't a God. Apple trees wouldn't give off apples 100% of the time if there weren't a God. Like begets like. That is only true because something is maintaining the isness of that law. And that's something we call God. But now define it. It's an impossibility. The word soul, then, cannot be defined. This we may know. God is the soul of man, and as the soul of man is the source of man's purity, spirituality, eternality, immortality. That doesn't define it. God is the soul of man. But you can also say God is the spirit of man. You could also say God is the life of man. And God is the law of man. God is the activity of man. God is the body. Even the body is the temple of God. God is the substance of man's being, of his life, of his soul, of his mind, of his body. But define these, that is impossible. In the experience of God, you have another thing enters there. You have an experience in which you are aware not only that God is right now a presence which is felt, but you still do not know what God is, even in the experience. Now, when you go to the next stage after meditation, when you go to the stage of communion, it is as if there were two. There is Joel and there is God. And Joel sits here with eyes closed, and it seems as if there is a presence and a communion between them, as if there were a flow of warmth, a gentleness, a gentle presence, a something back and forth. Here, Joel is aware of something greater than himself. But evidently, this something that is greater than Joel is also aware of Joel, because it is embracing him within. It is flowing back and forth. That may not be what's happening. That's the way it appears to me to be happening. And this sets up two-ness. I and the Father. That's exactly what Jesus did. He set up two-ness. I and the Father are one, but the Father is greater than I. I of my own self can do nothing. The Father within me doeth the works. This sets up two-ness until you commence to realize that it isn't two-ness. It's a communion between oneself and one's self, or between oneself and one's other self, or between oneself and one's higher self. Because there are not two beings here, there is only one, and yet there is something within me that governs me, maintains and sustains me, and yet it is me. Only it is not me on the conscious level, it is me on the level of consciousness. I described that, I believe, last night when I spoke of the difference between the conscious use of the mind in healing work, or being utterly still and letting consciousness itself, without the benefit of any words or thoughts of ours, take over and function. And it does this without words or thoughts, and yet the effects are wonderful. After the stage of communion, there is a still higher stage. And this one has been reached by many, many mystics throughout the ages. It is that stage where there is no longer a communion between me and the Father. There is no Father, there is only me. But not a conscious thinking me. It is where I become that consciousness which operates without thought or action, which just is a state of being. Now, in that consciousness, at union with God, complete oneness, I am not only aware of me, but I am aware, for instance, of looking down at me from up on a star. And at the same time, I'm conscious of myself looking up and seeing the star, and even seeing me up on the star, as if I were in two places at the same time. And then all of a sudden, I find myself looking out at me from the branch of a tree. And I'm inside the branch of the tree looking out, and yet I'm down on the ground and looking up, at me in the branch of the tree, inside the branch, not on the branch, as if I were the branch or the trunk. And the next thing you know, I am looking down at myself below the sea and seeing myself look up at me on the shore. For I am in the sea and I am on the shore. As a matter of fact, I am the sea and I am the shore. It's the shore looking at the sea, but it's me, both of them. This is conscious union with God, and this has been described. This actual thing has been described by more than 100 mystics who have experienced it. The one that we know best in this country is Walt Whitman, when he tells you that he is the life of the grass beneath his feet, and he is the life of the trees, and he's the life of everything that there is. He has had this actual experience of conscious union, not once, but many times. And yet, even after attaining that height, Walt Whitman came right down to earth again and went into the hospitals to help nurse soldiers and sit by their bedside and write letters home for them and mail their letters for them. And so it goes. Even with that experience, no one has ever described God or soul. Now the next is, please explain illusion. Well, I think that's simple. Anyone who has been on a desert and has seen water on the road in front of them has witnessed an illusion, because on close examination the water isn't there. Or they may have witnessed an entire city just a few miles ahead of them. And after traveling those few miles, and maybe 2 or 3 times more than those few miles, there is no city there. It's a mental picture which you see, which doesn't exist. In the same way, if you haven't been on the desert, you've certainly ridden on a railroad train or streetcar. And you have seen the car tracks come together in the distance. And that's illusion, because no such thing happens. Or you've looked out of your window and seen the horizon, the place where the sky and the water meets. That's an illusion. That's such a strong illusion that until 1492 it had all the people fooled, even the wise ones. But there is no place where the sky and the water meets in the distance. And you can travel all around the globe and never catch up to where the sky and the water meet. That is an illusion. That is a picture in your mind which you actually see, but which doesn't exist. Now then, we're speaking about the illusion of disease, probably. And here, too, you have a picture in thought of a condition that does not exist anywhere. It doesn't exist anywhere. I have a letter today from a lady who wrote me just a few weeks ago saying that her grandchild had leukemia and was given up by Materia Medica with no hope for its cure, and would I help? And I have a letter today on my desk saying the doctors have pronounced this child cured in just a few weeks. Now, if there was such a condition present as they say was present, where is it now? If it was present then and is cured now, what cured it? It received no medicine. It received no diet. It received no material help of any kind. Now, what cured it? What changed the condition, the bodily, physical condition, from then to now? Nothing. Nothing. Nobody touched it. Nobody touched it. The doctor gave it up. Evidently, then, the condition didn't actually exist in the mind or body of that child. It existed as an illusory concept. And where? Not in the child, in the human mind, the universal human mind. And that child just happened to be a victim of that particular picture. Some other child was a victim of polio picture. Some other child was a victim of pneumonia picture. Because in no case were the children responsible. It must have been a universal belief, and this picture existed in the universal human mind, mind of belief, second chapter of Genesis, and it pictured itself or outpictured itself as a picture in the mind of that family. The condition hasn't been dispelled. The picture has been dispelled. How has it been dispelled? In the same way that the picture on the desert is dispelled, by knowing the truth. The moment you know that the water doesn't exist on the desert, you start your car and go right through it and find it isn't there. It was your knowing that it was illusion that dispelled it. If you hadn't known it as illusion, it would have continued to fool you. And you would have stayed there for 100 years waiting for that water to dry up. Or at least you would have had to wait till nightfall until the action of the sun went away. Now, the illusion of sin or disease or death, and even the illusion of health, physical health and harmony, these are pictures in the human mind, the universal human mind. Now, in the ordinary metaphysical practice, the object of your work is to exchange these illusions of sin, disease, and death for the illusion of health. And so it is that when the doctor reports that the body is well, you smile and give a testimony as if that wellness were any more of reality than the sickness, like our child. This condition of health is just as much of an illusion as the condition of sickness was. That's how the healing was brought about. If I were working from the standpoint of merely trying to unsee the illusion of disease, the chances are we would not have been successful. The reason that Infinite Way work has been so successful in healing has been that we do not merely unsee the illusion of sin, disease, and death, but also the illusion of physical health and physical wealth. What is so spiritual about a physically healthy body when very often they drop dead tomorrow or get in an automobile accident and are killed? What is so spiritual about being a millionaire when the next day one can be with nothing? There's no more spirituality in millions than there is in pennies. There's no more spirituality in a perfect heart than there is in a diseased heart. And if you want to see real healing work, don't get overjoyed when the doctor says the heart's beating normally and the pulse is normal and this and that. He may mean that it's just normal for your age, but tomorrow you'll be a day older. Only recently I was talking to a doctor who knew my age, and he asked if I'd had a checkup recently, whatever the heart checkup is, and I said no. And he said, well, don't you think you should have it? No. Why? Do they testify truly? Can you rely on them? Well, not wholly. He said, a friend of mine recently had one, and the next day dropped dead on the street. Well, what's the use of it being told how healthy I am? No. No, we won't have it that way. Now, the point is this. Sickness, sin, disease, death, poverty, unemployment, these are the illusions of human sense. So is physical health and physical wealth. The only reality is your spiritual identity, your Christhood. And that you can't see, hear, taste, touch, or smell. You can only realize in your inner meditations when you feel that your life isn't yours. God is your life. That's when you're on safe ground. Not when you believe that you are healthy. No, you're not safe then. Not when you believe you're wealthy. You're not safe then. When you begin to realize God is the life of my being, when you begin to realize God is my wealth, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, stop claiming it as your possession, then you'll find that all that the Father hath is yours, whether of supply or life or intelligence, wisdom, whatever it may be. Never believe for a minute you're safe while you believe that you're alive, or while you believe that you have life, or while you believe that you have health. You're not a bit safe. But when you begin to realize God is infinite, therefore God constitutes my being, God is my life, God is my soul, God is my spirit, God is my hiding place. Now, you know, we've had this before. If you think that you've got a good bomb-proof shelter in your backyard, just don't depend on it too much. As a matter of fact, it would be far better to be walking out in the open air, right in the midst of the blitz, and realizing God is my hiding place, abiding place. I live and move and have my being in God, in Him, where nothing can enter that defileth or maketh alive, rather than to hide in some material structure. That's like hiding behind a perfectly beating heart. That's like hiding behind a good bank account. And then the government comes along and cuts the ground out from under you. It did in Germany. It has done it in England. It has done it in all of the Near Eastern countries. It's done it in the Oriental countries. Just chopped the life. Why, a French franc when I started traveling there was 20 cents. You buy 3,500 of them now for $1. So just supposing you had 3,500 francs, you had $70. Today you've got one. So what's the use of hiding behind francs? And we have the same thing in our dollars. A $4,000 automobile is really a $1,200 automobile. but it takes $4,000 to buy it. Therefore, if you had your $4,000 and your $1,200 and thought, my, I've got the equivalent of an automobile, now you find all you've got are the wheels. It is the same with the body. Don't ever feel confident because you're sure that your blood pressure is normal, or your heart is normal, or your digestion is normal, or elimination is normal. That's all nonsense, because in the twinkling of an eye, a germ, a bullet, a bomb, an automobile accident, it's all upset. But to be safe and to really have the assurance of your health and your supply, recognize God as infinite being, and God is my life. That life is eternal and immortal. God is my strength. I cannot get weak if God is my strength. If I believe strength is in the muscle, well, you know the answer to that. So it is. Illusion says that health is in the body. Illusion shows us that wealth is in the bank. Reality says, I am the Lord God Almighty, and beside me there is no other. I in the midst of me is mighty. I is the life of my being. I is my fortress, my abiding place, my high tower. Literally, whether I sit here in this room, walk out on the street, or hide in a concrete shelter, I still have to realize God is my abiding place. I dwell in the secret place of the Most High. I do not dwell in a body of flesh. I do not dwell in so many heartbeats per minute. I do not dwell in a good or bad digestive system. I live and move and have my being in God, and God constitutes the activity of my body. God constitutes the activity of the organs and functions of my body. God is the only activity, and as long as God is active, the organs and functions have to respond to that activity. Ah, yes. Don't be tempted by the illusion of sickness alone. Don't be tempted by the illusion of health alone. Don't be tempted to take account of man whose breath is in his nostril, for even when he's good or healthy or rich, he is still subject to the illusory beliefs of man who was born of woman, whose day is short. Now, we are not man who was born of woman. We were until we died to that individual and were reborn into the realization that I am I, and I live and move and have my being in God, of God. I and my Father are one. All that the Father hath constitutes my being. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, and Son, all that I have is thine. Then, when you're living in your God awareness, you're not living in a state of confidence in a human body just because it's painless at the moment. You're not living with your head in the ground, believing you're prosperous because you have dollars today, not knowing what tomorrow may have in store. But when you're living in the realization, and oh, how often I bring this out, I am the bread and the wine and the water. I can walk away from anything of a physical nature and still find myself resting, eating, sleeping, being regularly, because I and the Father are one. I am not dependent on that which is external to my inner self. God is my selfhood. God constitutes my selfhood, and in that selfhood is the infinity and allness of harmonious being. This makes me non-attached to physical health or physical wealth or physical strength or physical goodness. It makes me non-attached and allows me to live right here in the fullness of my own being, which last week we called self-completeness in God. Self-completeness in God. I am self-complete in God. All that the Father hath is mine. I live not by virtue of anything on earth, but by virtue of the grace of God which is ever with me. Now that covers this question when concerned relative to a physical appearance. That takes that whole question in and answers it for you when you are concerned with a physical appearance, even if it's a harmonious one. And you should be concerned with it even if it's harmonious. And translate it and begin to realize I am not living by virtue of a harmonious physical appearance. I'm living by virtue of the grace of God, the Spirit of God in me, which is closer to me than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. The Spirit of the Lord God Almighty is upon me, and it ordains me to live forever, harmoniously, joyously, peacefully, prosperously, and so forth. Is it the mental part of man on the subliminal level which makes the decision as to the time of passing on? Now you see, passing on is part of the illusion. Therefore, in the ordinary sense of passing on, man doesn't really make a decision. No part of man makes the decision. It is purely an illusion. Therefore, it never takes place. Man may come to a place in his life where he sees no further use of going on, or his difficulties are such as to make him want to jump out of his skin, and he can then gradually give himself up and walk out of this picture by what we call death. But remember, all he's doing is living an illusion, because it can't really happen. There is no such thing as passing on. There was a time when it was called death, and then we changed the name to passing on, but it was the same thing, just under a different name. But there is no such thing as death, and there is no such thing as passing on. That whole picture takes place as an illusory experience. The experience now of transition, that's quite a different thing. Those on the spiritual path do not die or pass on. They make a transition which has nothing to do with dying or passing on, because it's not an act of theirs, it's an act of God. Transition is not what we do, but what happens to us by the grace of God. And you can understand it better if I describe it this way. Let us say that you're an infant, and you make the transition from infancy to childhood. Now you have an entirely different looking body. You haven't died or passed on. You've just made a transit from infancy to childhood. Now you reach the age of puberty, and another change takes place in your body, but it is not dying and it is not passing on. It is a transitional stage into another phase of life. Now, as you reach the upper teens, you pass into still another phase of life, completely different than 12, 13, 14, 15. All of life looks different. Everything takes on a different complexion, and that is because you've made a transition out of childhood. Not only dolls and toys don't interest you anymore, but even baseball and basketball and football are getting a little bit monotonous because there are wider horizons ahead. You're commencing to see a world outside of the playground, a world outside of your neighborhood movie. That's a transitional stage. All of you who have had children go, you don't remember how bad it was for you to go through. Your parents remember. But you do remember how difficult it was for your children to go through. And you know with feeling just what they are experiencing when they go through that transitional stage that's going to take them into adulthood, where they really have a thinking, reasoning mind, where they really can be logical. And now you've made another transition, but they didn't do it consciously. It was done for them. And as a matter of fact, they had a struggle to accomplish it, to get through. So you keep right on, and one of these days you find yourself in truth, and when you get into truth very far, you find you're in another world. You've left all of that other world of bridge and golf and tennis. You've left all that world of dancing and theater, and you're in an entirely new world where you're thinking of God, talking of God. Well, you know, other people looking on must think you're crazy. I know I've been called that many times, and with good reason when you stop to think of the basis that they were thinking out from. We're in a different world. We've already made a transition. We've already made a transition from this world. That's what Jesus meant when he said, I have overcome this world. And there's no death about that transition except what Paul called dying daily. It is a dying daily to old modes of thought, old means of thought, old reliances. There again, we were relying on how much the heart beat. We were relying on the blood pressure. We were relying on the foods or climate or diet. Now we're only relying on our realization of God. Complete transition into a new world, a new state of consciousness. It has rightly been called the fourth dimension of life, in which you are dependent on nothing and nobody in the external world. Your entire dependence is right within yourselves. God is my life, not the heart, liver, or lungs. God is my life. God is my supply, not the dollars. God is my supply. A transition out of this world into the fourth dimension of life, in which you live very nearly a complete spiritual existence. And so we go on from transition to transition until one day, we don't do it, remember, this is all being done to us. None of us came to truth of our own accord. We were pushed in. And that's why the rest of the world isn't here. It hasn't been pushed hard enough. When it's pushed hard enough, it also will be in truth. And you will find then that a day will come when you will pass from sight, and undoubtedly as far as the rest of the world is concerned, you will leave a body to be buried or cremated. But you can take my word for it, that there will be no body there. That also will be an illusion in their thought. you will have your body right where you are. Now, I know from a long experience of work with Christian Science practitioners who have had, like I have had, many, many years of reading funeral services, that many of them have had the experiences that I have had of actually seeing the person standing at their own casket, looking out and smiling and saying, I'm not there. That has happened in my experience several times, and I have spoken to many, many practitioners who have had the same experience of seeing actually the person and seeing them laugh and say, it's no use. Of course, that is the meaning of the whole story of the resurrection. He is not here. He is risen. That's the whole meaning of the story of the resurrection. He is not here. He is risen. Where is he? There he goes, talking to the gardener. And then pretty soon his mother catches up to him, and they have a talk. And then a couple of the disciples come along, and they have a talk. Why, certainly, he is not here. He is risen. And you are not here in your flesh. The moment you have come into truth, you have risen to some measure above the illusion that you are in a physical body, and you're commencing to perceive that your body is something within your own consciousness. That's what gives you dominion over it. It is within you, and it is subject to you. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the law. I am the resurrection. If you destroy this temple, in 3 days I will raise it up again. And so it is that by virtue of I, which is consciousness, we have dominion over this body. And when it's sick, we can raise it up. And if it claims to die, we can lift it out of the tomb. He is not here. He is risen. This is not an isolated experience of one man, because if it were, it would have no value. What value would it have if somebody was great enough to raise their body from the tomb, unless it was done as an example to show us the immortality of life and body, and show us that we have the power to be raised out of the tomb by what power? I power, consciousness. I and my Father are one, and all the Father hath in mind, and I have been given God-given dominion over everything there is. And it cannot talk back to me. I function it, not by conscious thought, but by letting the body rest back in the I, and then let the I take over and govern without any conscious thought on my part. I never have to tell the body what to do. I don't have to tell my heart how much to beat. I don't have to tell my digestive organs anything, or eliminative organs anything. I don't have to tell any part of my body anything. I release it into the I, which is consciousness, or God. And then let that function. For it is the infinite intelligence of the universe, and therefore it created this body. Therefore it has the power to maintain and sustain this body if I release the body into it. If I take over with a human mind, first I have to determine how many times I want the heart to beat, and then I've got to sit there and be sure that it obeys. But the real teaching is take no thought for your body. Your Heavenly Father knoweth how many heartbeats you need, and it's His good pleasure to give them to you. Full measure. He won't hold out one. On the other hand, He's not too generous. He won't give you one too many. He's just even and right, normal and harmonious. Do you see, this brings us right back up again to that cloud 12, where you do not live by taking thought. Even though you've used all this to come up here, now here you are up here again, where you don't have to take thought for your body, how it shall move or not move, how it shall rest or not rest, how it shall eat or not eat. Now you're up here where you can relax. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. That includes my body and its functioning. And my thoughts are not God's thoughts, and God's thoughts are not my thoughts, so there's no use of my taking thought for this body. And so now I'll rest. And you see how quickly it comes. It says, peace, be still. Just as the Master said to the storm. What's the difference whether there's a storm at sea or a storm in your body? In either case, don't you say, peace, be still. I don't think either one will obey. But sit here patiently and let I, consciousness, take over, and pretty soon it will say, peace, be still. Or I in the midst of thee am I, or I am thy only life, and I am infinite. Somewhere deep down within you, something will come up into expression to assure you and reassure you that you've relaxed and yielded, you've surrendered yourself to the infinite invisible, and in one way or another, it will let you know that it has taken over. Whether this is your body or your patients or your students makes no difference. You see, you plant a seed in the ground, a seed of a rose, and you don't sit there telling that seed that it should come up a rose bush and that it should have roses. You don't take conscious thought. You just surrender that seed to its own environment, and then you wait patiently, and much to your surprise, a rose bush comes out of a rose seed. No, you're not surprised at all. That's what you expected. That's what you knew would happen. Why? Because you weren't governing. If you were, you may have preferred a papaya tree. Probably I would sometimes. But if it has to be the rose, I'll take the rose, if that's what God says. But I do like papayas. I'd have more papaya trees than I would rose bushes. Now, just see this. You plant your seed. You obey whatever you know to be the laws of planting. And then you let the law take over. You don't know what the law is. I could just well call it the soul of this earth. Or I could call it the mind or intelligence of this earth. Or I could call it God. I could call it the principle of nature. It would make no difference to you because you don't know the meaning of any of them any more than I do. It just means that you relax that seed into whatever its native element and law may be, and you let whatever that law is govern it until it comes out into flowers or fruit or whatever its nature may be. So it is. We give back our bodies, we take them right out of the mind. We place our body right back where it belongs, in its native element, in the consciousness that formed it in the womb. Now, could it be in better care than that? We didn't tell the body to have heart, liver, lungs, and so forth, legs, eyes, ears, hair. Being in its native element, the Lord took care of it and provided everything necessary Now we place the body right back there in its native element, consciousness. And the first thing you know, up comes from the depths an assurance. I am on the field. Take no thought for your life, for your body. Your heavenly Father knoweth, and it is his good pleasure to govern. Every day you have to relax your body back into consciousness so that you're sure your body isn't being operated on by human belief. Because if it is, you're going to watch your body get sick and die. You're going to watch your body get old. And why should we have that? The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. And so I relax my supply back into God. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, and now I rest back in consciousness, and let consciousness feed me, support me, maintain me, sustain me. I'm not looking at man whose breath is in his nostril. I'm leaning back on consciousness and realizing, thou art my bread, my wine, my water. Thou art my inspiration. Thou art the staff of life unto me. Thou art the resurrection of my being and of my body. Thou restoreth the lost years of the locusts. I take my body, my life, my wealth, right out of the human mind, right out of human experience, and place them back where they belong, in their native element. God is my consciousness, I rest in God. God is my consciousness, I am fed by God, my consciousness. The activity of my being, of my body, of my business, of my work, of my home, I rest it back in God. I do not place it at the mercy of man, whose breath is in his nostril. And without taking thought, I learned to wait for that still small voice. And it says, knowest thou not, I am closer to you than breathing and nearer than hands and feet? Knowest thou not, I am the rock? And then I feel something that says, whither shall I flee from thy spirit? Indeed, whither? I'm right here in thy spirit, resting in thee, relaxing in thee. Thy grace is my sufficiency in all things, in bodily things, in monetary things, in home things, in family things, in student things, in practitioner things, in patient things, in travel things. Thou art the activity of my being.